The Reuters Ipsos poll shows voters primarily motivated by the coronavirus pandemic, which has now killed more than 190,000 people and infected over 6.5 million. In addition, the president has been on the defensive this week after a damning article alleging he privately disparaged military veterans, referring to America's World War dead as losers and suckers.
It's a disgrace. Who would say a thing like that? Only an animal would say a thing like that. There is nobody that has more respect for not only our military, but for people that gave their lives in the military.
But he shared similar sentiments running for office in 2015 when he referred to late Republican Senator John McCain, who spent 5.5 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, as no war hero, an opening his opponent didn't pass up.
Quite frankly, if what is written in The Atlantic is true, it's disgusting. And it affirms what most of us believe to be true. That Donald Trump is not fit to be the job of president, to be the commander-in-chief.
As the two campaigns continue to contrast their events amidst a pandemic, with the Trump campaign opting for in-person rallies that defy health rules, like this one in North Carolina Tuesday, no social distancing, and very few masks.
Remember Kamala, she started at 15, she was supposed to win. Problem was she went from 15 to 14 to 12 to 10 to 7 to 4. It's like a free fall. You know why people don't like her? Nobody likes her. She could never be the first woman president. She could never be. That would be an insult to our country. Biden has now formed an unholy alliance with the most extreme and dangerous elements of the radical left. You know that, with Crazy Bernie and everyone. And by the way, you know who's further left than Crazy Bernie? Kamala.
While his opponent continues to hold smaller, socially distanced events, like this meeting with Labour leaders in Pennsylvania this week, or virtual ones, in accordance with public health guidelines.
Ladies and gentlemen, no matter what he says or what he claims, you are not safer in Donald Trump's America. You're not safe in Donald Trump's America, where people are dying at a rate last seen when Americans were fighting in World War II. Donald Trump's malpractice during this pandemic has made being a working American a life or death work. And while there's a disproportionate impact on Black, Latino, and Asian Americans and Native Americans' working class communities, white working class communities are being hit hard as well.
And, as is the case in all presidential elections, swing states remain key. Swing states refer to those regions that sometimes vote Democratic and sometimes Republican. But as of September 9th, Joe Biden holds the edge in a number of key swing states that are absolutely crucial to the incumbent's claim on a second term. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, even Arizona, that a Democratic presidential candidate has not won since Bill Clinton in 1996. Incidentally, also the same state that John McCain represented in the Senate for more than 30 years. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.
So for more on the elections in the United States of America and other related developments, we're joined now by our U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who speaks to us via Skype in New York. So, Sherwin, while President Trump appears to be hamstrung by the coronavirus in terms of what the current polls are telling us, a new controversy emerging there this week as to the extent to which he has continued to downplay the facts of this virus. So tell us a little bit more about that. How did it emerge, and what exactly is he heard saying in these audio tapes?
Well, we're in the I've Got a Book season a few months before the election. And so you'll see, you've heard from John Bolton, you've heard from Mary Trump, the president's niece, and now Bob Woodward. Bob Woodward, Cepiso, is a veteran journalist associated with the Washington Post that did a lot of the original reporting on the Watergate scandal in the 70s that eventually led to the resignation of former President Richard Nixon in 1974. He's well versed in these issues. He's got great contacts within the administration. administration and in administrations before that. What he did is he sat down for 18 on-the-record interviews with President Trump over the months leading to the release of his book next week. And among the conversations they had was around the president's posture regarding COVID-19. Let's listen to that conversation between Bob Woodward and President Trump.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want to create a panic. It goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. You know, the touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus.
So what that tells us, Ipsos, so essentially the president there admitting that he was lying to the American period. That conversation is from March 19th. And you'll remember around that period, this was the president talking about a virus that would simply go away. It was like the flu. China had been transparent. That was the period where China was still in his good books. The president was confronted by some of these concerns from reporters at the White House yesterday. His response here.
I'm a cheerleader for this country. I love our country, and I don't want people to be frightened. I don't want to create panic, as you say, and certainly I'm not going to drive this country or the world into a frenzy. We want to show confidence. We want to show strength. We want to show strength as a nation. And that's what I've done, and we've done very well. We've done well from any standard. You look at our numbers compared to other countries, other parts of the world. It's been an amazing job that we've done.
So those numbers is referring to Ipsos, 6.5 million infections in the United States, atop any graph you look at in terms of who's doing the worst in terms of the response to COVID-19, 190,000 deaths and climbing. We expect to reach 200,000 deaths before the end of September. So if the numbers were in fact to speak for themselves, this wouldn't be a very good narrative for this president. I will also, regarding the narrative around didn't want to create panic, wanted to be a cheerleader for the United States. A tweet from the president moments ago regarding law and order, the narrative that sort of emerged out of the recent Republican convention. Quote, Democrats never mentioned the words law and order at their national convention. If I don't win in November, America's suburbs will be overrun with low-income projects, anarchists, agitators, looters, and, of course, in inverted commas, friendly protesters. So this is a president that wants to create panic when it will benefit him in the election, but when it doesn't, then he's the cheerleader for the country.
And it's interesting, Sherwin. So months ago, we were talking about the ceiling that Trump was predicting in terms of the death toll. It was certainly less than 100,000. And now you're saying the figures are growing exponentially, and new data is out showing. And I wonder, to what extent does it agree or contradict him, especially on the issue of children and the degree of infections there?
You'll remember, Ipsos, that for months now, this is a president that has spoken about the very low risk of COVID-19 to children. He has been pushing now for months for schools to reopen in-person classes. Of course, a number of school systems around the country, including the biggest ones in Chicago and in some of the western states, have opened schools in terms of a hybrid model. So a very small percentage of children might be in the classroom, but the majority will be learning online. Of course, this is the president that has talked about the fact that children are almost immune. New data from the Children's Hospital Association, a joint project with the American Academy of Pediatrics, points to the fact that over 500,000 children in the United States, so you're talking about 0 to 18 years old, have tested positive for COVID-19. That represents about 10% of the overall number in this country. So it disputes the very essence of what this president is saying, that children are immune. They are not. Some 10% have contracted the virus. About 103 children have died, according to this report. And disproportionately points to a scenario we've talked about in our conversations before. Poor areas are being mostly affected in terms of the children numbers. Hispanics and the black demographic in the United States hardest hit in terms of children being infected.
So you mentioned earlier on, Sherwin, that it's I've got a book season, and it seems that President Donald Trump has stepped on some very important photos. He's raised the ire of quite a few by allegedly insulting not only a former South African statesman, but he's a global statesman. Let's take a listen to those comments.
Unfortunately, all too many times. We had one where right after Nelson Mandela had passed away, and I talk about this in the book. He asked me if I had known of any country that's run by a black that's not an S-hole. And I said, well, how about America? To which he gave me the proverbial FU.
Give us a backstory to those comments, Sherwin.
Yeah, no, absolutely is a book season. This week, of course, Ipsos, also a book that dropped is from Trump's former fixer, his former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, whose visuals you saw there. That was his voice in a discussion with the NBC's Today show earlier this week about his disparaging remarks about, the iconic president from South Africa, and as you correctly point out, a global statesman. The book is called Disloyal, the true story of the former personal attorney of President Donald Trump. Cohen basically talks about, this leader being running an organization that was akin to a cult, and that his supporters are sort of cult hero worshippers. He talks about Donald Trump being a racist. He talks about him having low opinions of black people, from culture, from entertainment to politics. He mocks religion, according to Cohen. He actually refers to an instance where evangelical leaders came to pray with the Republican nominee before he became president in 2016, and how he ridiculed the religious leaders after they had left. He talks about how he ogles at women. You'll remember that tape before he was elected in 2016, where he talked as a celebrity about being able to touch women on their genitals without any retribution. And of course, Cohen refers to the president as being a big fan of autocrats. He mentions Vladimir Putin by name. And we've also seen very complimentary words from this president towards the dictator in the Democratic Republic of Korea, North Korea, Kim Jong-un. So a lot of information in Michael Cohen's book. I will just say to Ipsos that the White House has said that Cohen readily admits to lying routinely, but expects people to believe him now so that he can make money from this book. It's sad that the media is exploiting this sad and desperate man.
Any other tidbits coming out of that book from Michael Cohen, Sherwin? I know you've mentioned quite a few, but and what is the impact on President Trump's popularity stakes, given all of these flurry of books that are coming out?
We've talked, I think, at length about how Donald Trump's support has been embedded for a very long time. It does not waver. What you will find that this election is going to come down is to independent voters that perhaps didn't like Hillary Clinton in 2016 and felt that they had nothing to lose by supporting what they certainly understood to be a very successful businessman, certainly within the American context. He had a very successful show called The Apprentice, and so those are some of the voters that might be equivocating as to whether they support President Donald Trump for a second term. In terms of that base, that consistent 40% that has stuck with this president for the last 3.5 years, books like this, revelations just ahead of the election, are probably not going to sway that basis of support. It's that middle of the road, people that sometimes go Democrat and sometimes vote Republican. That's where the urgency is focused right now, and that's why you hear this president talk so much about law and order vis-a-vis the protests, the elements of violent protests among the majority of peaceful protests we saw in the aftermath of George Floyd. And his target there, Ipsos, is the white suburban vote that he lost in 2016, and by virtue of that, lost the House of Representatives. That's why we have Nancy Pelosi as Speaker today.
All right, thanks a lot for that, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC correspondent out in New York.